don't mind, heat up the pulpit mic here. I'm going to try to stay kind of close to the pulpit today, so I'm going to aim it over to one side. Stray too far, somebody holler at me, come and get back on track. Here's what the bulletin looks like on the pastor's Facebook page, and I've scattered it around to, so if you use Facebook and you a follower on Facebook, we have a Walnut Grove has a Facebook page and a Facebook group, and you can do different things on one and not the other, and so that used to be very distinct, and now they're almost identical, so it seems like a redundancy. But anyway, lots of places to get this. You can see we've got one birthday left, it looks like, in the month of September. Dalton Stisher's got a birthday, I think, on the 30th. Doug's kids are getting older, Doug. Morgan had a birthday this week. Cart had a birthday last week. But pray for Danny Ward as he's going to, Terry and I have been invited to go back to Fosterville Baptist Church for homecoming. That's I was called there to be their pastor in 1977. We were there about 3.5 years and left there to go to seminary. I attended college while I was there. They were accustomed to having college students as their pastor, and so they were able to put up with that, and it certainly helped me a lot. I was 20 years old, just as green as a gourd, and they were very kind. And I learned. I think I was telling somebody, telling Danny and Liz, I think when my first night there, I was sitting on the edge of the bed. We came back home to Nashville where we lived, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed. I said, well, I'm a pastor now. I was scared to death. I had 6 sermons. And I was pretty sure I was going to run out pretty quick. So I had to learn how to prepare sermons. So pray for Danny as he prepares for preaching for us next Sunday. And preparation, a lot of people think that all preachers, we just get up and open our mouth and the words just come out, or we just shoot from the hip or off the top of our head, and that's not true at all. Every preacher or speaker, teacher that I've ever known that's been worth their salt are people who have to study a lot. They have to spend a lot of time in the Word and meditation and figuring it out. Years ago, I used to go over to the church every Saturday wherever I was pastor. I used to go over there when nobody was in the church, and I'd stand up in the pulpit and I would preach my Sunday morning and Sunday night sermons to the empty pews. Did that for a long time. I'd get there, I'd preach, I'd have it where I knew exactly what I wanted to say, what the Lord wanted me to say. And then I learned how to do that without actually having to be in church. I still preach my sermons. I do it over and over and over again. And without getting too spooky, I actually can dream my sermons. Now, I'm sure some of you have been listening to my sermons and said, this is a nightmare. It's not a dream. But before I can lay down my head on my pillow, I make up my mind what I want to dream about. Usually I don't dream at all, but I'll say, I'm going to dream, this is what I want to dream about tonight, and I lay down my head, and that's what I dream about all night. So that's helpful. And so you pray for Danny as he prepares his heart, his mind, and his words he's going to say, and he notes that he might have someone, and I've shared this with you, I know someone said, how long does it take to prepare a sermon? And I said, about 70 years. Just about 70 years to prepare a sermon. Because it's not entirely just the Bible. It's how the Bible has changed me, what I see in the Bible, and what others have taught me about the Bible, and what I believe about the Bible, and what has happened in my life since the day I was born. All right, let's go on to the next slide there, Art. Larry Guthrie is going to be with us on the 5th. I always look forward to Bucket being with us. That's always a good day. And we've already got our baby boxes are already in the works, so appreciate our workers for doing that. But we're looking forward to that. And you know, we from the first time, I don't think we ever really had a plan for it. I didn't know how we was going to. Nobody was coming along and said, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, what we're going to do. But when Bucket finishes and we say a dedicatory prayer, we never have had a structure or an outline or a plan for getting the boxes from here where Andy, he's the one that always brings them down here to the front for us. And if you thought a fairy did that, that just magically appeared. No, he has to do that. It's very hard to do. Put them on that rolling pallet. But we get them out there, and one of the most fun I have during the year is watching everybody, watching all of you load that truck down before they leave. So pray for Bucket. And I haven't been in touch with Bucket. I don't know where he's been or what he's been doing, but I do like to go over to his Facebook page every once in a while because he's almost always telling somebody about Jesus somewhere. And so it's exciting. Now on the 12th, Samantha Avery Buell is scheduled to be baptized. And you pray. I believe there may be some other people in the sound of my voice or have heard about this event or this coming. Now, Avery, today, right now, you've probably met in Vacation Bible School or here in Sunday school or in church, you've probably met Natalie. Natalie is one of Avery's friends. Natalie is being baptized this morning, and that's where Avery's at today. And they were celebrating with her friend. Going to be baptized. So if you or you know somebody that needs to obey Jesus' command, be baptized in water, and let me know, and we'll talk with you about that. We'll figure out something. All right? That's on the 12th of October. Let's go on to the next slide there. This is the Prayer Warrior Guide. Let's go ahead and hit that next slide there, Carter. I've already mentioned about Elaine Balch. Continue to pray for Jerry and Helen Wynn. Terry Bain's having cataract surgery. Hope she'll look better when she's done. And Robin Hopper, we've been praying for Robin, and I just realized I never put Robin, or haven't recently put Robin on the prayer list. We all thought Robin had cancer, and it looked very dire. But she's still having some tests, and recently had a biopsy, but everything still looks good. So pray for Robin. Terry's sister. Well, pray for me. I talked with Linda. Says her sister Helen Adair is improving, doing better. So but continue to pray. Continue to pray for Bonnie Shelton. Bonnie? Yes.
For Thursday, she's having surgery.
Surgery on Thursday. All right, let's pray for Bonnie. Pray for Bonnie. That's Ronnie's twin sister. Continue to pray for Shannon. And I haven't heard anything about Justin. Danny?
First stage permanently paralyzed. They're going through therapy now in Spain.
Okay, let's a friend of the Wards, particularly a friend of Shannon, but pray for Justin. Others that we've been praying for. Several weeks ago, Ken Baker, who is forgot her sister's name. Now help me, Liz. Vacation Bible School Director.
Tammy Wynn.
Yeah, Tammy. That's Tammy's sister. Kay Parkman. Evidently, she was aware we've been praying for through the Prayer Warrior, and Kay put a little note in the Facebook page that thank you so much for praying for me. God is blessing. So continue to do that. Last I heard from Deanne up in Arkansas is that she was improving greatly. All right, let's go on. You check that out yourself. Now, this is kind of like part 2 from last week, because this scene that is depicted here is what I chose for the front cover of our bulletin, and just with a question, why? Now, I kind of dealt with why last Sunday. We talked about the death of the very first Christian martyr, the first believer in Jesus who was killed because of his faith in Jesus, Stephen. Stephen was chosen as one of the first deacons there in Acts chapter 6. There were 7 godly men that were chosen by the church and ordained by the apostles, and Stephen was one of those. We dealt with why, but it was kind of like a scriptural answer, maybe a theological answer. It was anytime we're plumbing or measuring or scoping out the will and the ways of God, I think it always leaves a lot to be desired. Maybe really not all that helpful in answering the question, why? Listen, it's not wrong to question your faith or to question what you believe. It's a very good thing. We've been hearing for the last 8 or 10 years that we should believe the science, that we should never question the science. Well, science is all about questions. And we don't believe the same thing that Isaac Newton believed. We don't even believe the same thing today that Albert Einstein believed. We've learned a lot of things. So, question what you believe or what others have told you. It's not being irreverent. It's not being unwise. It's not even wrong to question God. Why, God? There are so many of the prophets and so many writers in Scripture who just looked up to heaven and said, why do the righteous suffer? Why do the unrighteous prosper? A lot of the prophets and minor prophets said, well, Lord, why is it that evil people seem to be doing so well? And that doesn't upset the Lord. It doesn't make him mad. It's not a sign of disrespect. And to say, I'm having some trouble here, Lord. I'm working through some things. Help me. Don't worry about that. Go on with it. It's not a sin or it's not a terrible, awful thing. You don't walk around with questions in your mind or doubts and fears. Sometimes, if no one else, you need to voice them to God or share them with others. I guess that's a dangerous thing. There might be some people who would condemn you or criticize you if you showed weakness. That seems to be what sometimes we do, even Christian people. But we shouldn't. Help, that's what Paul kept saying. Help those who are weak. You know why? Because sometimes I'm weak and I need help. Let's go on to the next slide there, Carter. Let's look again at Stephen. We're kind of going back, and it is in Acts chapter 6 when we meet him. He's ordained there as a deacon. One of the first church deacons, the first Christian martyr. Acts 6 and 7, it talks about, one, his selection and ordination. Now, they prayed, of course, and they sought God's will, but the church selected these people to be deacons. There are lots of things that the Lord, just like God brought Adam, set him down and said, I want you to name all the animals. Just name them whatever you want to name them. So there are times when God is going to put you in a place where he's just going to say, do whatever you want to do. Within limits. Don't go nuts. And then we see his service. There's no description there, but obviously the presence of these deacons solved a problem which was just about to split the church. The church was splitting up, dividing up, choosing up sides. Inequity in ministry and service. Some people were being neglected, it appeared. And it was probably true. But though we don't have the details, it seems obvious that the deacons, God used them in a wonderful way to serve the church and to save the church. But then in the last part of the book of Acts, chapter 6, we see Stephen not in the church, but outside the church. I've heard people say, cliches abound about everything and all the time. This is one worthy perhaps of repeating. It says you can define a church's success not by how many come, but by how many go. It's good to have people come to church. And I invite you, if you're out there watching us from TV land, if you come and be with us if you can. And you that are here this morning, if you have family members or friends, then come and be with us at church. Come and visit with us. That's okay. It shouldn't be our primary invitational push. We're inviting people to Jesus, but invite people to church. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, if that's all we do, that's wrong, but that's not all we do. And so Stephen was not just somebody who was a good deacon because he was always at church. He's out in the marketplace, and that's what we see here. He goes out to where the folks are. He goes out to where the people are. Let's go on, Carter. And so he starts preaching. And he's a young man. We don't know if he's married or not. We don't know if he has a wife or children. We don't know anything about his family or who he's kin to. But when he went out to the marketplace, the Jewish people kind of cornered him there in the crowd, and he just went into a history of the Jewish people. Went all the way back to the Old Testament, and he connected the Old Testament to Jesus. He proclaimed that Jesus was the culmination of all the Old Testament promises and prophecies. He was the Messiah. But here in Acts chapter 6, verse 10, it says, they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. I admire intellectual people. I look at people who are very intelligent and smart, and I say, my goodness, look at that person. They just seem like they're so effortlessly smart. They just know things. They know lots of things. And please don't ever be jealous of people who seem like they have that gift. I don't want to be jealous of people. I meet so many people who are sharper than me and know more than me. That's a common phrase I use at work. I often have a customer on the phone at work, but I can't help them. I don't know what the answer is. And I tell them on the phone, I said, listen, I'm going to find somebody who's smarter and better looking than I am, and they're going to help you with this problem. It always gets a laugh, and so I keep using it. It's pretty corny. Sometimes people will put in a ticket, they'll say, my camera's not working. When during COVID, everybody at NASA was working from home. So we used a program so we could see each other and hear each other from home. That was a nightmare. Dogs and cats and birds and weasels. Lots of hair curlers and bathrobes. People put in tickets and say, my camera is not working. And so I restore the drivers and I do a BIOS update, and all of a sudden their camera comes on. I almost go, whoa! I said, maybe this wasn't a good idea. I have to be careful. No, you're ugly. You don't need to have a camera. You like me. Keep the camera off. But they said, no, they said we had to have our camera working. This is not new, and it's not even more prevalent, but I think I see this more because of social media today, all the different applications that brings everybody to the internet. And I see a lot of people who hate smart people. They just despise them. And they criticize them and condemn them, and they reject them. They throw stones at them. Well, that's what they're about to do to Stephen. And then they suborned men who said, we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God. And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him and caught him and brought him to the council, to the Sanhedrin. What does that sound like to you? That's exactly what they did to Jesus. Now, they were in a bind. Pontius Pilate was at the pinnacle of his career and his power and authority. And there were actually two men who were serving as high priests. Caiaphas and his father-in-law, Annas. Now, Pilate at this time, the minister of Stephen, is still the procurator of Judea. But he's in deep, deep trouble with Rome. He's fallen out of favor. Pilate is on the way out. He's in trouble. And so we have the high priest, just one, is mentioned here, but not by name in this Stephen story. So they didn't feel like they could just take Jesus out from public view and murder him. They had to talk Pilate into crucifying Jesus. But here, they're just going to snatch Stephen up and take him outside the wall of the city and stone him to death. They're not going to hesitate. Different high priest. Pilate's on the out. He's never even going to hear about this. You know, if he did, he didn't care. They suborned. They subpoenaed. They subpoenaed men. And they said, well, you know, he said all these things. He's blasphemed against Moses and against God. Please don't ever believe everything you hear from anybody. Talked about doubting or questioning. You ought to look at every preacher who ever stands before you and always look at them with squinted eyes and question everything that they say and see if their life measures up with their message. And they set up false witnesses who said, this man continuously speaks blasphemous words against this holy place and the law. If you're going to murder a good man, you've got to lie about him first. You've got to create a case. You've got to call him a bigot and a racist, and you've got to call him a Nazi and a fascist. And then you can kill him. Everybody says, well, you know, we ought to kill all the Nazis we can. We ought to, everybody that's a terrible person deserves to die, so we can just kill them. And so this is not a new tack. It's not something that just started this week. It's been going on forever and ever. Now, I wanted to create the impression, first of all, in introducing Stephen to you in a different way, is that he was a good person. He was a very good person. And the church loved and respected him. And he was a faithful servant, and he helped the church. If you listen to these people, you would think that he was a terrible, awful person, a blasphemer, cursed God, wanted to tear down the temple. For we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth shall destroy this place and shall change the customs which Moses delivered to us. That's the very same, you know, remember when Jesus said, destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll raise it up? You and I can say, well, obviously he wasn't talking about Herod's temple. He was talking about, as the gospel says, about his body. If you kill me, in 3 days I'll arise. And all that sat in the council, looking steadfastly on him, saw his face as if it had been the face of an angel. Now, a lot of people smile, and a lot of people have that politician face, is what I call it. Sometimes it's the televangelist face, the preacher face. I can't really tell you about this or recommend it, but have you ever looked at someone as they're talking to you and you just look at their face, their eyes, and their expressions, and there's a voice in your mind that just says, I don't know. Salesman or a opportunist of some kind. See somebody talking to you and look in their face and say, I want to tell you something. Used car dealers get a bad rap. I grew up with a used car dealer. That's what my daddy did most of his life. But he sold cars in Flint and in Decatur. If you lie to people and sell people bad cars, do you know what happens in the used car business? You're out of business. You can't be a dishonest used car dealer and live in Flint. Everybody finds out and they won't buy your cars. It only takes about a year for that to happen. My daddy almost sent us to the poorhouse many times because he would spend too much money on an old used car getting it ready to sell. He'd fix everything on it. Make sure that it was perfect. And a lot of his car sale buddies would say, John, you're just spending too much money on them old cars. Just sell them. Well, Daddy couldn't put up with that. Daddy, I would guess, had the face of an angel, but he never lied to anybody. And he tried to be an honest car dealer. All right, let's go on the next slide there, Carter. In Acts chapter 7, verse 1, the leaders of the council and the high priest says, are these things so? You see, that's the fact of the matter, that a lot of times we don't know what's true and what's not. The high priest was saying, are these things so? I don't think he was asking Stephen. I think he was asking the witnesses. In Stephen's response, he began to spout the history of the Jewish people. And then in verse 51, he says, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears. You also resist the Holy Spirit as your fathers did, so do you. Well, that sounds ugly, don't it? Uncircumcised and stiff-necked in heart. You need to loosen up your belt a little bit if you don't believe that good people might call you a bad name. You dummy! What are you, some kind of idiot? Well, especially here in the South, you can't reject someone or condemn someone to die just simply because they use crude language, or they're ill-mannered, or they say ugly things. Look back and read the Gospels. There was a Syro-Phoenician woman, she's a Gentile. She comes and she needs a miracle from Jesus. And Jesus said, he was trying to tell her, I'm here to help the Jews, not the Greeks. And Jesus looked at her and said, I'm not here to feed the dogs, I'm here to feed the children. I'm thinking, whoa! Call that woman a dog. That didn't hurt her feelings a bit. You know what she said? She said, well, Master, even if you're eating at the table, you let the crumbs fall off the table so the dogs can get a hold of it. Man, she was there to get a miracle from Jesus, and she got one. But it just sounds ugly. It sounds rude. Yeah, we're living in a day and age right now. If someone thinks that you use harsh language, or that maybe you don't like women, or maybe you don't like transgender people, or maybe you don't like gay people, or maybe you hate some people. There's some people you hate in society. Well, we'll just kill you. We'll give. The only way of getting rid of you is to kill you. In verse 52, he says, which of the prophets have not your fathers persecuted? And they have slain them which have shown before the coming of the just one, of whom you are now the betrayers and murderers. Well, I think if you call somebody a murderer, that's pretty harsh language. It's fighting words, isn't it? There's something about you and me that ought to be a little different. I don't know if hardly any people in our whole country understand what the Bill of Rights is all about, or what the First Amendment actually means. Freedom of speech. You can say things that are rude, and you can say things that are crude, and things that are ugly. You can say things that are wrong. You can say things that are hateful if you want to. That's what we believe. And we don't have to listen to it. We don't have to pay tax money for you to be in a public platform. And we can't guarantee that people will not reject you or cancel you. That might happen. There are always going to be consequences to freedom of speech. Stephen is going to find out that when you say things like this, somebody might kill you. And that's a risk you have to take. Let me tell you something. This is tough. You might get in a situation before you die one day that you have to decide, and you're going to be given a choice, either to tell about Jesus or die. And you're going to say, well, I'm going to tell you about Jesus and I will die. That's a possibility, and I accept that. I'm just going to tell you about Jesus, and you can kill me if you want to. But I'm not going to tell you about Jesus and then stand on my right to live. I might die. Who have received the law by disposition of angels and have not kept it. You have not kept the law. Let's go on, Carter. And when they heard these things, they were cut to their heart, and they gnashed on him with their teeth. But he, being full of the Holy Spirit, looked up steadfastly into heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing on the right hand of God, and said, Behold, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. And they cried out with a loud voice, and they stopped their ears. They put their fingers in their ears so they couldn't hear what he had to say. They knew there was only one way to get him to shut up, and that's to kill him. Turns out that really doesn't work either. They stopped their ears and ran upon him with one accord. They cast him out of the city, and they stoned him. All right, let's go on, Carter. Why? Well, I did talk about what God is doing last Sunday, so I'm not going to repreach that sermon. But I'm going to ask this. Why didn't God protect him? Why didn't God help Stephen? Why didn't he rescue Stephen? Why? Why didn't God help? I don't want to make you mad or disappoint you, but God is going to, in your whole life, if you belong to Jesus, he's going to protect you right up until the point where he doesn't. You're not on a picnic. You're in a war. You know what you are? You're a soldier. Now, a soldier, when they go in, they're recruited or they volunteer, they go into the military, they'll send them to boot camp first because they want to teach them certain skills. They want to teach them how to kill. They want to teach them how to do battle and war. And they want to teach them how to stay alive. But let me tell you something. One thing that they do clearly teach them. Commanding officers tell all of our soldiers, all of our military men and women this. The most important thing in this war is not to keep you alive. It's to fulfill the mission. That's the most important thing. The most important thing, we're about to charge this hill. What's the most important thing, Mr. Captain, sir? Take the hill. What if we get killed? Well, that's not the most important thing. That's probably a lot of y'all are going to die. You're a soldier. Read through the Gospels again. Time after time after time, Jesus made people mad and they came to get him. You remember those times? He went to Nazareth one time and told them in the Nazareth synagogue that he was the Messiah, and they grabbed hold of him and took him outside the city, was going to throw him off a hill there. I've been on that hill in Nazareth. And it says that it wasn't time for him to die at that time, and so the Lord just helped him. He just whoop, just kind of slipped out of their arms, slipped out of their hands. There were lots of times when they came to get Jesus, and Jesus said, it's not my hour, it's not my time. But when he was praying there in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was saying, my hour has come. There's nowhere in the Bible. There are a lot of places in the Bible where the writer of the Bible says, the Lord protected me. The Lord saved me. The Lord delivered me from my enemies. And he does that. But then sometimes, and maybe ultimately for all of us, he's going to send us to charge the hill. Fall on the grenade to give our life. God has a plan. And in that plan, it doesn't always mean that you and I are going to be protected, that our families are going to be protected, and our loved ones are going to always be protected, or that there is a certain kind of prayer to pray, or a certain kind of faith to have, that if we have that kind of prayer and have that kind of faith, then our loved ones, we and our loved ones will be safe from harm, and we won't be sick, and we won't die. But that's bad theology. That's not true. Yes, there are times when the Lord will deliver you. I know when it's happened. I was recently in an automobile. Nair can back me up. Nair and I were recently in an automobile, and the person was driving went to sleep at the wheel. That was exciting, wasn't it? And I like to snooze and nap when I'm not driving. Do you do that? I'm not a very good passenger. I like to go to sleep. But I stayed awake. And I looked over and I saw that our driver was asleep. And we were going about 60 miles an hour, and we were headed straight into oncoming traffic. I grabbed the wheel and whipped us over there. I had no feeling in my heart at all that I had just saved us. Thank you, Jesus. And I wasn't mad at the driver because I was sleepy too, and it had been a long trip. Didn't have any hard feelings at all. It wasn't their fault. But I knew the Lord had saved us. He's done that many, many, many times in my life. Let's go on to the next slide, Carter. I recommend that you buy this book and read it. It's been about 20 weeks back in the 80s and early 90s in the New York Times bestseller list, written by David Arnold. And it made a hit. Well, evidently, there were millions of people that were struggling with this question about this book. David Arnold's a rabbi, Jewish rabbi. Why do bad things happen to good people? You need to read this. Now, I disagree with the conclusion that he came to. In the very last chapter, David's son died. David's son died. And as a rabbi, this is a terrible blow. And it was really hard on his faith. He was trying to find out the answer to this question. And so this was his answer. He was saying, that's okay, God. I know that you're doing the best you can do. You're trying, but there's only so much you can do. And it's not that you fail, but it's just the job or the responsibility is overwhelming. And so, Lord, from now on for the rest of my life, I want to cut you some slack because I know that you're doing the very best that you can do. And there's just a lot of things that you can't fix. That was his answer. Now, I don't want to put you off. I think you ought to read this book because that was an answer, and in his mind, it saved his faith. It saved his opinion of God. God was just not a perfect God. He was not an all-powerful God. God was somebody he loved, and he just needed to find out God was doing the best he could do. But it just wasn't enough, and his son died. I don't agree with that. I don't know David, and I don't know if he's still alive or not. But if we ever had a conversation, and I've had lots of conversations over the years about this book to tell people I don't believe he got the right answer. And my heart breaks for him. And I felt compassion for him, but I disagreed with him. Let's go on to the next slide. R.C. Sproul is one of the greatest theologians of the 20th century. He's gone to be with the Lord now. And someone asked him, why do bad things happen to good people? And R.C. Sproul said, that only happened once, and he volunteered. Reformed theologians believe that Jesus was the only good person who ever lived. Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, you're not a good person. So if bad things happen to you, you're probably just getting what you deserve. Well, I don't agree with that either. Jesus was a good person, and he did volunteer for bad things to happen to him. But this is not good theology, and this really doesn't help, does it? Let's go on. We're about at the end. Hang with me. One of my favorite preachers was a former pastor, did a lot of conference preaching, and named Ron Dunn. I got to meet Ron at the Gardendale First Baptist Church many years ago. But when Ron was preaching, and when he was at the top of his preaching popularity all across the country, Ron's adult son committed suicide. He took his own life on Thanksgiving Day. And it really stunned Ron. Ron kept preaching, but the death of his son really knocked the wind out of him. And his preaching did change. And I had a whole collection of his tapes, cassette tapes of his sermons. And I could tell a difference in the way he used to preach. The content wasn't different, but he was a better preacher after his son passed. And this is something he said, and I want to tell you what Ron Dunn said. He says, if God came to me and explained to me perfectly why my son had to die, he said, it wouldn't be enough. It wouldn't be enough. If God came and said, this is just exactly, I had a plan, I didn't do it pell-mell, this had to happen, and this is all the good that came out of it. He says, if God came to me and explained to me precisely, exactly, in his divine plan, his eternal plan, why my son had to die, Ron Dunn said, it wouldn't be enough. You know, in my gray years, I just about give up on questions and answers. I don't like hardly any of the answers that I think I found over the years. Let's go on. That's it. Of those philosophies and those people who think they've found the answer, Dunn's is not an answer, but that seems to speak to me more than anything else I've ever found, I guess. Let me tell you something. When Terry and I were serving, we served for about 5 years at Vandale Baptist Church up in Arkansas. And preached a lot of revivals back then. Preached all over the country. Terry and I'd go, we'd preach weekend revivals, week-long, 2-week revivals. I was just preaching all the time, everywhere. Church would let me do it, and we just traveled all over the place. I went to one place, and the people there, I met one of the members of the church, and he raised pigeons. He raised pigeons. I'd never been around pigeons much. They're mostly in the cities, aren't they? Around statues and in parks and whatnot. And he gave me some cages full of pigeons to take home. Mom, Terry was so glad to see me when I came in, with a back seat full of pigeons. I didn't know anything about pigeons. He told me what to eat. I take care of them. I wanted to build a place to put them in. And I remember I got them all kind of set up there and learned a little bit. Got me some books on pigeons. We didn't have any children, and we wished we had children, so we had cats and dogs and other things, and so now I had pigeons too. And I remember the first time one of my pigeons felt comfortable enough and at home enough that actually she laid a couple of eggs. She had a nest, and so there were 2 eggs in there. I felt like a granddaddy. 2 eggs, and they're just eggs. And I began watching them things. I watching, and behold, I went there one day and I saw that there was a little bitty hole in one of those eggs, and I could see a little bitty beak kind of going like that through that tiny, tiny hole. I said, look at that. This egg is hatching. I came back the next day, and that hole wasn't really very much bigger. Whole day, and I watched it for several days, and I began to worry and complain and fret. And for 3 or 4 days, I come back and it seemed like that hole still wasn't much bigger than the end of a pencil eraser. That all I could see was a beak just trying to peck away and rolling around inside that egg. And you know what I did? I helped him.
I helped him. I got me some little tweezers and some little pliers and things out in there, and I chipped away, and I cracked it, pulled, until I had that whole baby chick out of that egg. I helped him. You know what happened to that little baby pigeon? It died. It died. I didn't understand much, but that little baby pigeon, just like all little baby pigeons, just like all little babies, at the point of birth, is just almost as close to death as they can possibly be. I remember when my two children were born, they had a heart monitor hooked up to the baby, not to the mother, but to the baby. We could see that baby's respiration and heartbeat, and just before my children were born, I thought they were going to die. But all of those contractions and all of that labor and all of that pain and that intensity is what gets the fluid out of that baby's lungs and stimulates their muscles and activates their brain waves. And what looked like a struggle of life and death to me in the pigeon that's exactly what it was. And chipping away at that eggshell helped it develop. And